I don't know if you could really say that Trainmaster changed the game in train simulation. I think that technologically it wasn't very much more advanced than the other simulators in 1993 when it was introduced. It didn't even have a first-person perspective originally. It was a side-scroller. So, there was a lot of physics involved, and the physics were very good. The sound generally got praised also, even if the horn and the bell sounded kind of cheesy. The engine sounds were widely considered to be the best. You could say it was an incremental improvement, sort of, over Gatwick Express, but lacked the first-person perspective of Southern Belle and Evening Star. Actually, it was the first really accurate simulator for American trains, as far as I know. Because all the other good simulators in the 90s were for European stuff. Here I'm driving a combination of SD40s and GP40s with a freight train over a fictional line. The full version of this had authentic railway lines from around the United States, although this is a demo version of version 3.2, which was the final version with the side-scroller perspective. 4.0 introduced first-person perspective in the year 2000, and actually it was terribly timed because it came out right around the same time as Zusi. Mechanic had already been out for a few years. RailSim reached its final version in that year. And then ultimately, Microsoft Train Simulator came out, which really did change the game. You could argue that that was what made train simulators widely available across all markets. Although the internet, of course, played a significant role because really all of the first-person perspective train simulators of around the year 2000 and slightly earlier and slightly later were distributed via the internet as often as they were distributed on disk. And a lot of them, like BVE and Mechanic, were set up by hobbyists, essentially. And some of them still survive today. There is still a BVE developer community. Trainmaster, though, is getting very, very hard to find. Ultimately, it was acquired by Raildriver, who made controllers for it. This was fun, though. I always enjoyed this. I never had the full version, but I had the demo seen here. It was very accurate, and there weren't a lot of other simulators to compare to it in the 90s. It could run on DOS and early versions of Windows. It couldn't run on Mac OS, which always bothered me, so I always had to run it on an emulator. My school didn't have this. This was a little bit of a niche interest at the time. My sense is that in some ways rail fanning has declined, in some ways rail fanning is now better off. Because the older people are dying off, but way more younger people seem to be at least respectful of rail technology today than when I was a teenager. So we'll see where that goes. It is reflected in the fact that there are quite a lot of train simulators available now, all of them better than this. Or most of them better than this, anyway. But this was where it began for America. Actually, Trains Magazine and Model Railroader Magazine carried advertisements for Trainmaster for many, many years. Because, as I said, the accuracy was, in terms of physics, pretty good. It was much better, for example, than Train Engineer. Train Engineer wasn't even a real simulator. And the British stuff was mostly unknown in America. I mean, Cab View Driver, for example, was intended for the ZX Spectrum. Or rather, Driver. Cab View Driver was PC. But again, very, very rare. I wish I could have played through Cab View Driver, but I just can't find a working copy of it, even a demo to play through for YouTube. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to skip that important piece in the puzzle, which is regrettable. For American freight trains, of course, you have to kind of ease them up and down in terms of speed. You're seeing that here. I'm talking so much, and I'm not talking very much about the actual train being run here. Basically, I'm easing the throttle up to avoid wheel slip, accelerating uphill. In some respects, this is a pretty easy interface because you can see your signals and your speed limits well in advance. Of course, if you have cab signaling on a real train, you have this. And the Germans and arguably Americans at this point, I haven't seen a new cab recently, but the timetable is often available on a computer screen now in a locomotive, depending on what you're driving. So that also helps you to predict what you're going to have to do next, which is very important when you're driving a train, because everything lags so much. You have to plan very well in advance, like how you're going to accelerate, how you're going to decelerate, and so on. And this is why, for years, to be legal to work a railway line, even if you're not driving the train, you have to know the whole route. You have to know where all the speed limits are, where the mileposts are, where any other hazards are, so that you know exactly what to do in every situation and know how to plan your route. It's also useful, of course, if there's an incident, because you can get the emergency services there faster, because you can just look out the window and you know where you are. On this particular run, I didn't use the brakes at all because the whole run is uphill. This demo version, the primary limit on it, other than that you only get this one route and 2 trains, is that it has a 10-minute limit. So when it reaches 10 minutes, you're done, basically. You're out of time. And in this playthrough, of course, I wanted to show the introduction screens and everything else, so I don't even show the whole scenario here. It's not possible to complete it anyway. If you're driving the passenger train, you can maybe get to the summit station, but it isn't really possible to complete the scenario in the demo. So I don't, for the purposes of this playthrough. So here I've been running for quite a long time. 7 minutes there. And I've only gotten the train up to 30 miles an hour, and just as I succeed, I get an approach signal. So I have to ease it off once I reach that signal. I've switched the bell on sort of prematurely for that crossing. I said in a previous playthrough, I'm a little bit out of practice on train simulators. So my driving's a little bit sloppy. So, since I'm going uphill, I'll slow the train down by cutting the throttle back and letting the grade pull my speed down. So, no brakes. The thing about using the air brakes on a freight train of this length is that they're so slow to respond, it's best to find every other alternative you can. It's partly why dynamic brakes are so common on American locomotives. And I'm running out of time just as I'm reaching these crossings because of the time limit on the demo and the time limit of the most restrictive YouTube accounts. So, I'll see you in the next video, and thanks for watching.